Imagine 12 of the most expensive legal minds in Calgary sitting around a boardroom table, sweating through their custom shirts at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night. They had one job: find the flaw in a $300 million land acquisition before the deal expired at midnight. They failed. Evander Morrow, the man who had rebuilt his family's development empire from the ground up, was 2 minutes from signing, but then a hotel banquet server, a woman earning $14 an hour, a woman nobody had looked at twice all evening, set a coffee carafe down on the credenza, turned around, and said 6 words that stopped everything cold. This is not a story about real estate. It is a story about who gets to be smart and who gets to be seen. This is the story of Reva Blaine. The Palliser boardroom on the 43rd floor smelled like cold coffee and collective dread. Outside, November sleet pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning Calgary's downtown into a smear of amber and grey. Evander Morrow stood at the head of the table, his back to the room, hands clasped behind him. He was 36, lean, with the kind of patience that wasn't calm at all, it was coiled. His family had spent 30 years building Morrow Group from a 2-acre lot in Cochrane into the largest private development firm in Western Canada. Tonight's acquisition, 400 hectares of northern Alberta land sitting above a natural gas corridor, was supposed to be the piece that made them untouchable. The offer had come from Langdon Cray. That was the problem. Langdon Cray sat in the lobby of the development world like a crocodile in shallow water. He smiled at charity galas, sponsored university chairs, and had spent 15 years systematically undermining every competitor who tried to match him in the northern corridor. Now he was offering Morrow Group the land they had been trying to acquire for a decade. $300 million. Midnight deadline. "Walk me through it again," Evander said to the room, without turning around. Colvin Pruitt, the firm's senior acquisitions director, adjusted his collar. He was 51, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore cufflinks to breakfast. "The title is clean. Mineral rights confirmed. The environmental remediation certificate clears the federal standard. We've checked the survey 3 times. Langdon's team has been transparent at every turn." "Langdon Cray has never been transparent in his life," Evander said quietly. "The numbers don't lie, Evander." Colvin's voice carried just a trace of impatience. "If we don't sign tonight, he sells the parcel to the Matsuda Group. We lose the Northern Corridor. We lose the leverage on every project we have lined up for the next decade." Evander turned around. He looked at the 12 people seated at the table. Lawyers from 3 different firms, environmental analysts, compliance officers, a forensic accountant headhunted from the Federal Competition Bureau. Every single one of them was nodding. Every single one of them was telling him to sign. He sat down. He stared at the acquisition package in the center of the table. 400 pages of certificates, titles, surveys, and remediation reports. He had a feeling the way you have a feeling about ice. The surface looked solid, but something under it was wrong. "1 hour," he said, "or I find 12 new lawyers." The room went back to work. Reva Blaine had been on shift since 4 in the afternoon. Her feet hurt in the particular way that hotel work produces, not a sharp pain but a grinding one, the kind that starts at the heel and climbs by 10 o'clock. She was 27. She wore her dark hair pulled back tight and kept her expression neutral, the way you learn to do when your job depends on being unobtrusive. She had been invisible for most of her adult life. Invisible at Dalhousie when she had been studying environmental compliance law and had been one of the top 3 students in her cohort. Invisible when she had withdrawn 2 credits shy of her degree because her younger brother Finn had been hit by a construction vehicle and spent 8 months in rehabilitation that their mother's insurance wouldn't cover. Invisible since then, picking up whatever work she could find. Legal courier, office temp, and for the past 14 months, banquet server at the Palliser. She knew she was smart. She also knew that knowing it hadn't bought Finn a second surgery, so she kept it to herself and did her job. The 43rd floor private boardroom was a late booking, full coffee and water service, 1 food refresh at 10. Henri, the banquet floor supervisor, a man who communicated primarily through disappointment, had pulled her aside before she went up. He said, "Top tier. You go in, you fill the cups, you leave. Do not make eye contact. Do not speak. Do not exist." "I know how to do my job, Henri," she said. She went up. The room was thick with tension when she entered. She could feel it before she heard it, the particular silence of people who are afraid. She moved along the credenza, replenishing the carafe, lifting empty water glasses. Nobody looked at her. She was furniture, she was fine with that. She moved toward the far end of the table. The acquisition package was spread across the surface in organized chaos. Tabbed sections, sticky notes, printouts cross-referenced with highlighter. The lawyers were deep in the mineral rights attachments. The compliance officer was on the phone in a low voice. Riva set a fresh glass of water near the elbow of the man closest to her, and her eyes fell, without intention, on the environmental remediation certificate in the open binder in front of him. She didn't mean to read it, but she had spent 2 years studying exactly these documents. Her brain didn't ask permission. The certificate was issued by the Federal Remediation Assessment Office, standard format, issuing date stamped at the bottom. November 11th. Riva's hands went very still on the water pitcher. November 11th was Remembrance Day. Federal offices were closed on Remembrance Day. The Federal Remediation Assessment Office did not issue dated certificates on statutory federal holidays. The electronic system locked out authorized officers across all provinces on statutory holidays. It was a regulated process, a security provision that had been in place since 2009. She had written an essay on exactly this regulatory gap in her second year. The essay had received the highest mark in the course. The certificate in front of her was a forgery. She looked at the adjacent page. The sign-off from the remediation contractor, Apex Environmental Services Limited. The company's federal registration number was printed neatly at the bottom. She knew you could verify corporate registrations against the Federal Registry. She had done it hundreds of times in law school. She did not have her phone on her. She had a memory that worked like a trap. She thought about what she knew about dissolved companies in the Federal Registry. They retained their old registration numbers in archived records. If Apex had been dissolved, their number would still surface in documents. It would just be attached to a ghost. She couldn't verify it standing here, but she could see the seams. She moved toward the credenza, turned around. Colvin Pruitt was saying, "The certificate is valid. The contractor sign-off is clean. We have everything we need." Evander Morrow picked up the pen. "It's not valid," Riva said. The room went silent the way rooms go silent when something unexpected happens, completely, instantly, like a hand over a speaker. 12 heads turned toward her. Colvin looked at her the way people look at a car alarm that won't stop. Henri, standing near the door with his arms folded, went visibly pale. Evander Morrow did not move. He looked up from the pen and found her. His eyes were dark and very direct. He did not look angry. He looked, for a fraction of a second, like someone who had been waiting for exactly this. "You have 10 seconds, he said. His voice was low, not threatening exactly, but it had weight that kept the room still. Riva clasped her hands in front of her to keep them steady. "The environmental remediation certificate," she said. "The issue date is November 11th. "Which was 3 weeks ago," said one of the lawyers. "It's current." "November 11th is Remembrance Day," Riva said clearly. "Federal offices are closed. The Federal Remediation Assessment Office cannot issue a dated certificate on a statutory federal holiday. The electronic system locks out authorized officers province-wide. That certificate is a forgery." The room did not make a sound. Evander looked at her for a long moment, then Bertrand. An older man at the corner of the table, silver-bearded, watchful, who had said very little all evening, pulled out a tablet. His fingers moved. The sound of typing was very loud in the silence. "She's right," Bertrand said. He looked up. "The FRO system logs show no issuance activity on November 11th. Province-wide lockout, exactly as she described." Colvin Pruitt's face had gone the color of old chalk. Riva didn't stop. Her brain was already 3 steps ahead and she had nothing left to lose. "The remediation contractor," she continued, keeping her voice level. "Apex Environmental Services Limited. I'd check their federal registration status. The number format suggests they may have filed dissolution paperwork in the last year. If they were dissolved before this certificate was allegedly issued, you're not buying a remediated property. You're buying land with federal contamination liability still attached to it. The moment title transfers, you assume full responsibility. That's not a purchase. That's a prison sentence dressed up in legal paper." The typing stopped. Bertrand looked up again. His expression had changed entirely. "Apex Environmental Services Limited," he said, reading from the screen. "Dissolved in March. Struck from the Federal Corporate Registry June 14th. The silence that followed was different from the first one. This one had weight. Evander Morrow set the pen down. He did not make a production of it. He simply set it on the table and looked at it, and then at Colvin Pruitt. "Colvin," he said. We had the certificate reviewed. This isn't." "I didn't." "Get out of my boardroom." Colvin gathered nothing. He walked to the door. He did not look back. The door closed with a soft, definitive click. Evander Morrow looked at Riva. She became aware suddenly of what she was wearing. The black and white server's uniform, the scuffed flats. The name tag that read, in small block letters, Reva. "Your name," he said. "Reva Blaine. You said contamination liability. Elaborate." She did. For 4 minutes, she laid out the federal transfer of liability provision under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, the precise mechanism by which a forged remediation certificate would shift hundreds of millions of dollars in cleanup obligation to the acquiring party, and the regulatory timeline that would make the liability impossible to contest once the title transfer was registered. She spoke without notes. She spoke the way she had spoken in classrooms a long time ago, when she had still believed that being the best in the room meant something. When she finished, Evander Morrow looked at her the way you look at something you weren't expecting to find valuable. "You studied law," he said. "Environmental compliance, Dalhousie. I didn't finish." He didn't ask why. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, produced a business card and a money clip, and peeled 5 bills from the clip, enough to cover Finn's next 2 physiotherapy appointments, and placed them on her tray. "Take the rest of the night," he said. "Henry will." He glanced toward the door. "Henry, Miss Blaine keeps her schedule open." A pause, and her job. Henry said, "Of course, Mr. Morrow." Evander turned back to her. The air between them was charged in a way that had nothing to do with money or documents. "I'll call you in the morning," he said. "I have a position that needs filling, a real one." She walked out with her heart hammering in her ears. She had just stopped the most powerful developer in Western Canada from signing a forgery. She had done it for $14 an hour, and a handful of bills she was already mentally allocating toward Finn's account. She didn't realize, stepping into the service elevator, that by speaking she had made herself visible, and that Langdon Cray would want to know exactly who had seen through his trap. The call came at 7:58 the next morning, not from Evander himself but from his executive assistant Patricia, who spoke in the precise, unflappable English of someone who had managed difficult men for a long time and been surprised by very few things. A car would be downstairs at 9. There was a garment bag in the lobby. Reva's name was on it. She opened the bag in her Inglewood apartment, a 1-bedroom where the paint above the baseboard heater had begun to bubble, and found a charcoal blazer and matching trousers that fit as though they had been cut for her. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror. She looked like a different person. She felt like an impersonator. She went anyway. Morrow Group occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in the east end of downtown. Evander met her in a corner office with views of the Bow River, and on the horizon, the pale winter outline of the mountains. He was reading something when she came in. He set it down. "Sit," he said, just without preamble. She sat. "I looked into you," he said. "Top of your cohort at Dalhousie, every professor described you as exceptional. You withdrew 2 credits before completion." He set the file down. "Why?" "My brother was injured on a job site. I was the only one who could cover his costs while our mother managed the rest." "Your brother Finn." He said it without inflection. She looked at him steadily. "You did look into me." "I always understand what I'm acquiring before I acquire it." No apology in his voice. "Finn's outstanding medical account. I settled the balance this morning." She felt the air go out of her lungs. "You didn't ask." "Consider it a signing bonus," he said, "whether you sign or not." He waited for her to process it. Then, "The man who forged that certificate, Langdon Cray. He has been trying to displace me from the Northern Corridor for 8 years. Last night he came within a pen stroke of doing it legally. Colvin Pruitt was his instrument." Pruitt was working for Cray. "Has been working for Cray for at least 2 years. He brought me the deal. He managed the due diligence process, which means he controlled what my legal team was given access to. He curated the review." Evander's voice was measured and without heat, which was somehow more frightening than anger. He didn't account for someone outside the review process seeing the certificate. "He didn't count on the coffee service," Reva said. The corner of his mouth shifted slightly. "I want you to find out how far it goes, where Cray's money moves, what Pruitt handed him, whether anything else in our pipeline has been touched." He leaned forward. "I'm offering you head of regulatory compliance and internal audit, $280,000 a year, plus a discretionary bonus structure. You report directly to me." She was quiet for a moment. "I have 2 conditions," she said. He raised an eyebrow, negotiating before accepting. "Always. First, I work clean. I don't touch anything that isn't above board. If I find something illegal in your operations, I report it through proper channels. I'm a compliance officer, not a fixer." "Agreed." "Second, 5% of whatever we recover from Cray if it comes through my work." A long pause. He looked at her without expression. "Done," he said. He stood and offered his hand. She shook it. His grip was warm and direct. "Welcome to Morrow Group, Riva. Try not to make me regret being impressed." She was relentless. Within 3 weeks, she had rebuilt the compliance department, dismissed 2 junior analysts who had been rubber-stamping documents without reading them, and built a financial tracking model that mapped every outgoing payment from Morrow Group's subsidiary accounts against third-party recipient registries in real time. The model found Pruitt on a Tuesday. It was past 11. The office was dark except for her desk lamp and the blue glow of her monitor. She was cross-referencing a shell company called North Water Advisory Inc. against the payments ledger when the door opened. Evander walked in. He was carrying 2 containers from the Korean place around the corner that stayed open until midnight. "You haven't eaten," he said. "I'm close," she said, not looking up. He set the food beside her keyboard and stood behind her, reading the screen. "North Water Advisory," he said. "Incorporated in the Northwest Territories 14 months ago. No website, no declared employees, no physical address. But they've received 41 wire transfers from your Foothills subsidiary over the past year, totaling $3.2 million, invoiced as consulting fees with no corresponding deliverables on file." She clicked through to the registry. "The signatory on the Northwater account is Colvin Pruitt. Home address in Springbank. He was billing us to pay himself. To pay Langdon Cray through himself. Northwater is the pass-through." She pulled up a second document, but that's the smaller part. I reconstructed this email chain from deleted files in the server backup. Evander read in silence. "Pruitt wasn't just moving money," Riva said. "He was giving Cray access to your acquisition strategy. Site assessments, environmental pre-reviews, bidding timelines. For 14 months, Cray knew exactly what Morrow Group was going to bid before you bid it. He was either counter-bidding to drive up your costs or blocking your permits through regulatory contacts." "The Lethbridge parcel," Evander said quietly. "The Olds project. I thought we were being outmaneuvered." He paused. "We were being robbed." "Yes." Riva hesitated. "And there's one more thing. The chain includes a message from Pruitt to Cray, sent 5 days before the boardroom meeting. It contains your personal security schedule, your route, the timing." Evander went very still. "Someone ran a red light into my car on the 14th, he said. His voice was precise and stripped of inflection. "I know," Riva said. "I read the police report." The silence that followed had a different quality. She could feel the anger in him, contained, pressurized. He walked to the window. He stood there for a long moment. "I want to see Pruitt tonight," he said. "Not to hurt him," she said immediately. He turned around. "He sold my location to someone who tried to kill me." "I know, and if you touch him, everything I've built disappears. He's the only living link between Cray and the financial trail. If Pruitt talks, and he will, because he is a frightened man and frightened men always talk, we can go after Cray's entire operation. His permits, his land holdings, his federal contractor approvals." She stood up. "We don't need to punish Pruitt. We need to use him." He looked at her for a long moment. In the dim office, she looked nothing like the server who had stood in the Palliser boardroom, holding a water pitcher. She looked like exactly what she was. "All right," he said. "Your way." They found Pruitt at his Springbank acreage, fireplace going, scotch in hand, looking like a man who believed the trouble had passed. When Evander walked in, Bertrand and 2 others behind him, Riva with her laptop, Pruitt's face cycled through several expressions and landed somewhere around despair. Riva opened the laptop on his desk and turned the screen toward him. The financial model, the Northwater transfers, the email chain, the security schedule. She let him read it all the way through. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "Cray has something on me," he said. "I couldn't." "I'm not interested in why," Evander said. "I'm interested in where." Pruitt looked at Riva. She held his gaze and did not look away. "Tell us where Langdon Cray keeps his master records," she said. "Not the offshore shells, the real ledger, the one he uses to manage everything." A long pause. "His personal server," Pruitt said finally. "Cray Building. Sub-level 2. The everything is there. Every deal, every bribe, every permit he purchased." He looked at his hands, including the ones where he used government contacts to block your applications. "You're going to call him tomorrow morning," Riva said. "You're going to tell him the audit came back clean. That we found nothing. That Morrow Group is going to let the acquisition expire quietly and move on. And then you're going to give a detailed statement to the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. Because I'm sending them everything tonight. And when they come for you, and they will, You want to be the person who cooperated first, not the one who waited. Pruitt looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Evander. Evander said nothing. He simply waited. "All right," Pruitt said. "All right." The RCMP Financial Crimes Unit executed the warrant on Langdon Cray's office on a Thursday morning. The document package Riva had built for them mapped every transaction, every forged certificate, every manipulated permit application across an 8-year period. Langdon Cray was arrested at his building's front entrance in full view of the Beltline morning traffic. The 400 hectares of contaminated, misrepresented land was seized as part of the fraud investigation, meaning Cray had spent years engineering a trap that ultimately dismantled his own portfolio. Pruitt cooperated fully. The $3.2 million in Northwater transfers was frozen and traced. Riva was at her desk when she heard. She sat quietly for a moment and thought about her brother, about her mother, about 2 years of early mornings and tired evenings, and the particular humiliation of being brilliant in rooms where no one was paying attention. Then she went back to work. 90 days later, Morrow Group was the largest clean title developer in Western Canada. Evander had taken 3 subsidiaries public, settled 4 outstanding permit disputes that Cray's interference had stalled, and launched the Northern Corridor project that would generate work for 2,000 tradespeople across Alberta. But what people talked about, inside the industry, in the business press, among the lawyers who had once sat in that boardroom on the 43rd floor, was the compliance restructure. The new audit framework. The woman who had rebuilt the acquisition review process from scratch and had not, in 90 days, allowed a single document through without reading it herself. They talked about Riva Blaine. There was a night in late January when Evander came into the office at 10 o'clock and found her at her desk, a stack of contract appendices beside her, and an untouched bowl of soup going cold on the other side, her reading glasses slightly pushed up on her head as she cross-referenced a permit number against a provincial registry database. He sat across from her. He didn't speak for a moment. "You look like someone waiting for the other shoe to drop," he said. She looked up, set her glasses down. "The job is almost finished. The company is clean. The story has an ending." She paused. "Usually when a project wraps up, the contractor gets paid and goes home. I'm trying to figure out which one I am." He leaned forward. In the lamplight, his face was open in a way she hadn't seen before, less the composed executive and more the man underneath. "I have been surrounded my entire career by people who told me what I wanted to hear," he said. "Expensive people, capable people. Not one of them told me the truth in that boardroom when it mattered. You were the only one who spoke up. In a uniform, holding a tray, with nothing to gain and everything to lose." He was quiet for a moment. "That is the bravest thing I have seen in 30 years of this business." She didn't answer. Her throat felt tight in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Come somewhere with me tomorrow night," he said. "No agenda." "Where?" "Back to where it started." The Palace's private dining room on 43 looked different without the legal teams and the terror and the midnight deadline. Evander had reserved it entirely. 1 table, set for 2, candles. On a clear winter night, the windows showed the city all the way to the dark silhouette of the foothills. Riva walked in wearing a dress the color of deep water, which was a stark contrast to the uniform she had worn the last time she'd stood in this room. Invisible, tired, absolutely certain that smart women who ran out of money just had to keep their heads down and their opinions to themselves. The ghost of that version of herself was still in this room. She could feel it. Evander stood when she came in. He pulled out her chair. "Mrs. Blaine." "Mr. Morrow." They ate. They talked about things that had nothing to do with compliance frameworks, about Finn's recovery. He was walking again, working toward a return to the trades. About Evander growing up in Cochrane in the long shadow of a father who believed that showing weakness and asking for help were the same thing. About the time Riva had won a moot court competition in her 2nd year, and the only people who had noticed were 2 other students and a professor who had since retired. When the plates were cleared, Evander reached beneath his chair and produced an envelope. He slid it across the table. She opened it. Inside was a land title transfer document. The property described was the Palliser Hotel building, all 43 floors, the restaurant, the ballrooms, the private dining rooms, the lobby where she had stood 4 months ago in a garment bag someone else had selected, trying to figure out how to look like she belonged. Her name was on the title as sole owner. She looked up at him. "I transferred it this morning," he said quietly. "This is the room where you were made to feel like furniture. I want you to own it. I want you to walk in here knowing you own the building, the floor, the table, and the chair, Henri always positioned you beside instead of in. Her eyes stung. She pressed her lips together. There's a clause, he said. Of course there is. Turn the page. The last sheet was not a legal document. It was a plain piece of paper with nothing on it except a small velvet box taped to the center. Her hands were not entirely steady when she lifted the box free. She opened it. The ring was a deep blue sapphire, the color of the Bow River in late summer, set in white gold. It was not ostentatious. It was precise. It looked like something chosen by a person who had been paying very close attention. Evander stood up. He came around the table, and then, the man who had fired 12 lawyers without blinking, who had outmaneuvered an entire industry for a decade, who bent to no one. He went down on one knee on the hardwood floor. Riva, he said. His voice had none of its usual armor in it. I have run every calculation. I have reviewed every possible variable, and the only version of the future that makes any sense, the only one I actually want, has you in it. She looked at him. I don't want a transaction, he said. I want a partnership, no limited term, no exit clause, just you, deciding whether this is something you choose. He held the ring up toward her. She looked at the man who had first seen her when no one else was looking. She looked at the ring. She looked at the room that was apparently hers, and she thought about the night she had walked in here with aching feet and a nearly empty bank account. Certain she was invisible, certain that being the smartest person in the room was a fact that would die with her unremarkably, and she had spoken 6 words because she simply could not watch someone be robbed in front of her without saying something. She had spent years believing that intelligence didn't matter if no one was positioned to notice. What she hadn't accounted for was the one moment when the right person was in the room. Yes, she said, clear and certain. He slid the ring onto her finger. He stood and pulled her into him, and she stayed there, her forehead against his jaw, for a long, steadying breath. When she pulled back, she was smiling. I do have one condition, she said. You're already negotiating. Always. She looked up at him. Since I own the building now, I'm instating a new staff policy. The service team gets a living wage and proper benefits starting next quarter, non-negotiable. Evander looked at her for a moment. Then he laughed, low and unguarded, the laugh of a man who had not expected to be outmaneuvered at his own proposal. Done, he said, obviously. And that is how Reva Blaine went from pouring coffee in a room where no one would look at her, to owning the building, the room, and the trust of the man who had finally been paying attention. She proved what she had always known and never had the stage to demonstrate. That in a world that runs on leverage and the performance of power, the clearest eye in the room will always win. It just has to be willing to speak first. Langdon Cray is serving 11 years in federal custody. Colvin Pruitt lost his license, his Springbank acreage, and is cooperating with 3 ongoing investigations. And Finn Blaine walked his sister down the aisle in April, on legs the doctors had once said might not fully recover, in a ceremony held on the 43rd floor of a hotel his sister owns. If this story moved you, hit the like and let us know in the comments. Would you have spoken up in that room with that much at stake? Subscribe and ring the bell, because the next story is already waiting.